thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a real privilege to be able to share some of my thoughts with you and some of my experiences. So, but it's nearly not for me, so feel free to already interrupt. We do have a Q&A also afterwards, but I know that people come and go, so if you don't want to wait for the Q&A, feel free to interrupt and talk in between, or ask questions in between. So first of all, yes, climate change used to be this thing which happens to the polar bears, right? Or it happens to our grandchildren, right? But increasingly, we are realizing that climate change is actually the definition. It's the thing that when you shoot the evening news with your own mobile. Unfortunately, this summer is particularly showing this, and I don't want to go through all the news because I'm sure you yourself, how many of you have already experienced some really extreme weather this summer? So what were these? Yeah, the heat waves and or the smoke in New York City, or this, guess, where is this from? It could be almost from anywhere, but it was particularly happens to be from Slovenia. So yes, for a long time we just thought, especially in Central Europe, that, well, we are safe. You know, climate change is this far thing. Okay, it happens not only to polar bears, but it happens to California, and it happens to where the tornadoes are, and we are safe. Then suddenly last year, this happened to us as well. This is the Lake Balaton, and we faced a particular drought. But also last summer was quite a textbook case, because it also showed that it's no longer just about our vacations, but it actually really hurt a lot of the budgets of our families, because our maize crop, for example, failed. 3/4 of our crop maize failed, 1/4 of our wheat crop failed, and as a result, also it aggravated the impacts of the war, because as a result of the Ukraine-Russia war, the grain exports, as we know, have been failing. So with also the crop failing in Africa and India, suddenly the prices really increased, but we will come back to that. Last summer was already pretty bad. This slide only estimates about 24,000 fatalities as a result of heat waves, but in fact the recent numbers are more about 60,000. Now, if the pandemic took 60,000 lives, we were pretty much alarmed, right? Oh, 60,000 lives. Nobody talks about the 60,000 lost lives due to heat waves, but indeed, it is the heat that takes the largest amount of toll in Europe, but it's not an being used topic. But unfortunately, as this meme shows, it's unfortunately the science really reconfirms that it's only going to get worse, so we have to get used to a new normal. So, for example, this heat wave, which happened in the northern United States and Canada in 2021, when literally it was not possible to live outside for a longer period, which really already reached the biological limits of human beings, close to 50 degrees. It's not a question of if it comes to Europe, but only the question is when it comes to Europe. In fact, it has already arrived to Europe many times, because Sicily, Spain, and many other of these countries already experienced heat waves of such a degree, but we may have some time before it hits Eastern Europe, but we certainly have to prepare. So this, I really like this figure. This figure is from the IPCC, where I am Vice Chair now, and this is from our latest report, the synthesis report. What does it show? So first of all, you recognize perhaps the climate stripes. How many of you have seen the so-called climate stripes, these colorful things? Not many. Well, in that case, you might want to go just hashtag climate stripes on your phone. You can do your own climate stripes for your hometown. What this does is it shows the average temperature of your life, for example. So anything that's cooler than the average of the pre-industrial period is kind of bluish. Anything that's warmer is kind of orangish or red. And it's quite cool to do it for your own city. But this is where we are. So we basically show that climate really has already changed. the point is that yes, it's still going to change more. There is no way we can prevent it from changing more. But there is a huge difference if we get to this or we get to the top stripe. If we get to only to this orange, stay with the orange, or we get to the purple. And I think the other reason why I really love this figure is because it really condenses why action is not taking that much. Most of our decision makers are maybe in about this age. So it means that most of their lives they have lived in a nice, stable, cool climate. Perhaps, sorry. Also, yes, they may still worry about a few more decades getting worse, but most of the decision makers can think that maybe they can still prevent the impacts really impacting them, because usually they are from the more well-off layers. At the same time, a lot of the youth, the lives of a lot of the youth is going to be in a completely different climate, and a lot of it about it is very uncertain. We don't know really what is going to happen. For example, if the Gulf Stream collapses, UK will definitely be very badly affected, but also the rest of the Europe, and in fact the rest of the world. But it's very difficult to say. Even the science is not, there's no consensus from the scientific community really. All we know that it's going to be really serious. The problem is that because of this, because, how do I go back? Yes, this way. So because this is happening not so fast. It's not like suddenly there is an earthquake. It's not like suddenly there is a tsunami. But like this summer we have had at least 100 news about extreme weather. So there is a risk that this is going to happen to us. Do you know this experiment when you put the frog in a pot of boiling water, right? If you put the pot, what happens if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water? It jumps out, yes. It jumps out. But if you put a frog into a pot of water, into a pot of cold water, and you turn the heat under it gradually up, it boils. It doesn't go out. Sometimes I feel that this is what's happening to us. We are just getting used to all the news. Yeah, it's the new normal. Yeah, there is another flood. Yeah, there is another heat wave. So there is certainly that type of risk as well. This version of the figure, you can imagine it was not done by the IPCC. It was some artists who have kind of illustrated the same figure. I really like the later Walkflakes diagram that was added. It's true, we don't like, when you're a parent, you're not yet a parent, but you remember your childhood when your parents said, "Oh, I told you so," right? You hate it. Did you hate it? I'm sure you hated it. "I told you so," right? It's really tough when we scientists have to see that, "Sorry, we told you so." But it would be great if we wouldn't have to say this again, that we warned that we don't, in order not to get to the orange, we should have acted earlier. So the problem is that this year the climate is really scary. A lot of my climate scientist colleagues are just standing there really scared. What the hell is happening? We really don't understand why a lot of the trends are just literally going off the charts. I promised the organizers that I'm not going to show you a lot of scientific figures or no scientific figures, but I have to show you these figures because these are not because it's scary, but I think, we could turn the music up on the top of the Titanic and in the music, in the festival, we are doing that. But it's still the Titanic, and we still have to understand that it is the Titanic, but then, of course, we will show how to avoid the Titanic. But look at this. This is the sea surface temperatures of the world, and all these lines are the annual, what the average sea surface temperatures in the world have been in all the different years that we have ever measured. This year, it's just totally going off the charts. But this is not the only one. If we look at, this is from The Economist, it's no way a tree hugger magazine. How many of you read The Economist? Yeah, a couple of you. So, yeah, or sometimes, it's no way, actually for a long time, quite a long time, they were really climate skeptic. But they are also really alarmed what the Antarctic ice is doing this year, completely off the charts. But to go on, equally similar, this is also the Antarctic sea ice anomaly, but a little bit later, because now that was published a little bit earlier. Or this is the recent figure from the European Copernicus service about the average monthly temperature of July. This is all the average temperatures of July of the history. So not only was last July the hottest month ever recorded on the planet, but it was, look at this, it was practically 0.3 degrees hotter than any previous Julys in the world before. And it just exceeded also the previous hottest month ever on the world, which was June this year, and also exceeded this by 0.3 degrees. And how many of you have been around in July in Hungary or Central Europe? So just a few. So I'm sure you're thinking, yeah, it could have been a bit warmer. How about that global warming happening a bit more, right? Because we did not have a very hot July. In fact, many people are more complaining about it could be a bit warmer because it's ruined our holidays. On the other hand, we are still lucky because all around us have been experiencing much worse events. So, and also if we look at the North Atlantic, again, the sea temperature of the North Atlantic just literally going off the charts. So just a lot of these figures, and one more, this is global surface air temperature. So that's also so far just going off the charts. So most indicators that we look at, climate scientists, are literally going off the charts. I don't know how many of you have seen the film The Day After Tomorrow. Have you seen The Day After Tomorrow? Remember the scene when first the guys are sitting around and they are looking at the temperature buoys. And that is this, one of the boys starts to measure really extremely low temperatures, right? Remember that? And then they are saying, oh, it's a mistake. So somehow I feel like in that film, in that scene, that it must be a mistake. Yes, please. Very good question, thank you. The question was how much of this is due to El Nino? Right now, very little of this is due to El Nino, because El Nino has just started. And the biggest impact in El Nino will probably come around December, and it's going to continue over next year, September, December, and over the next year, since mostly it impacts when the southern hemisphere summer. So the northern hemisphere summer is not very much affected normally yet, especially this far. And usually the biggest impact is actually after El Nino, after a strong El Nino. It takes years still, the impact. For example, interestingly, a really strong El Nino rubs off 3% of US GDP, annual GDP, and not in that year, but usually 2 or 3 years later still. Yes, the southern hemisphere countries are expected to have an even harsher impact of El Nino, but we are not saved. The worst is for coastal countries. So usually they are affected most. Many coastal countries can experience as much 10% loss in their GDP as a result of El Nino. If someone doesn't know what is El Nino, then El Nino is an ocean current oscillation. It's happening in the southern hemisphere, which has 2 phases, the El Nino phase and the La Niña phase. And depending on which phase it is, it's really influencing whole global weather and global temperatures. And it has nothing to do with climate change, but it's now starting to interact. So, and certainly when it happens, it aggravates climate change. So we also see maybe in the global sea ice low, it could have an impact, but still not a very big impact yet. But also we see that this is happening. And this is what we have all talked about already, the event in New York City. So, but let's not talk about all the doom and gloom, but let's focus on what the IPCC says, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. What we do is we synthesize the science and publish the reports about what really the science can altogether tell to policymakers and decision makers what can be done. So yes, we have so far issued 6 reports, 6 cycles of assessment reports. I'm now elected for the 7th assessment report cycle, and sometimes we do have the feeling, hey, is the microphone on? Because we do keep repeating almost the same, well, not the same messages, but pretty much the same word, hey, you really need to act. But yes, let's just see some of the key findings of the recent reports that we had. So, yes, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of UN, coined a report saying, "Code red for humanity." So certainly it's a significant alarm bell. But yes, one of the key things that we said, that already we are experiencing climate change, and many of these changes are unprecedented in thousands of years. So often we hear the claim that, yeah, just let me finish and I'll come to you, that, yeah, climate change, climate has always been changing, so why bother, Why don't we just get used to it instead of putting all this hysteria about it? The point is that we are really experiencing changes that we haven't seen for actually not only thousands, but more. I will show you in a minute, but let me know your question. The AMOC, yeah, the Atlantic Meridian Oceanic Circulation. What the IPCC, the question was if the IPCC believes whether the AMOC collapses. The AMOC is the ocean circulation system that contains the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream is extremely important in determining Europe's climate. And if you do nothing else, just look at a world map and look at, for example, spot Helsinki, and look at, on the same latitude, what's happening in Canada, then you immediately understand the impact of the Gulf Stream. So it's extremely important. The latest report said that right now, whether the AMOC collapses is as likely as it is not likely. So we have kind of 50-50 chance that it happens in this century. Nevertheless, since we finished that research, more research has come out. Sorry, since we finished that report, because we don't do research, we just synthesize the knowledge out there. Since that finished, more evidence came out that there are increasing signs of the AMOC already showing signs of collapsing, which doesn't yet mean that necessarily it's the case. There is, again, scientific uncertainty, and not all scientists agree with that. But this is certainly the thing that keeps me most awake, because that is, from all the tipping points that we are talking about, that is which will have the impact fastest. So whether the if the Greenland ice sheet melts, which probably it will already collapse, but it takes a long time. So let's get back to the unprecedented impacts, and we see it's not only thousands of years. So the global average temperature has not been so high for 125,000 years. Carbon dioxide concentrations have not been so high for 2 million years. And this change we caused in literally one generation. In my generation, we have caused most of this change. So that means, and if we look back in Earth's history, we have never seen such a fast change. It's even for species, it's extremely difficult to accommodate to that. But for humans, it's even more. I just like this cartoon a lot. It's not about climate change, it's about, some scientists call it the insect apocalypse. So the fact that insects are declining tremendously. For example, we are on an island in the middle of a river. We should have, clouds of mosquitoes. Clearly, we are trying to control them. We don't want them. So we are very happy not to have it. But it's true that, on the other hand, this is among the other things that we have done within a lifetime that we have already got rid of. For example, with insects and a lot of the biodiversity. But the problem is we don't realize that in the end we are depending on insects very significantly, if not nothing more than, for example, for pollination. So when we get a lot of times the question, you know, when will the world collapse? The world will not collapse. The world will be very happy without us. On the other hand, we will not be so happy without the world, meaning, for example, without insects, because, for example, they do the pollination for us. 3/4 of our food depend on some sort of pollination. So, in the end, and also the survival of the insects actually also very much depend on climate change. So, this is just a funny, I like this figure anyway. But the point is that if we look back and this is the most complex scientific figure I want to show you. I promise you I won't show you anymore. So what this shows is the paleoclimate history of the world. What this shows is that in the last 60 million years, what was the global average temperature of the world as compared to basically the pre-industrial. So the pre-industrial is set to 0 now. It's not linear, so it means that here this is just 50 years, but here this is 1 unit is already 20 million years. The point is, so we are about roughly here, not quite, but roughly here. The point is that yes, it is true that the climate has always been changing. There has been much colder, there has been much warmer than today. But if we look at this, Homonoids have roamed the earth for millions of years. Homo sapiens has been around the planet for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet civilization, only since when do we have civilization? We only have civilization since the climate entered into a very stable era. In the last 10,000 years, the temperature of the Earth has been very stable. It has not moved out of the 1 degree centigrade range, virtually. This enabled agriculture. Agriculture enabled us to share labor, to divide labor. This enabled culture. This enabled having a festival. This enabled so many things. Now, already out of this, this very stable, all our society, all what we eat, why we eat, what we produce, where we live, where we have many people, where are our country borders, where is our wealth, what kind of wealth we have. All of this is very significantly determined by this very stable climate that we have been having. Now already we have kicked out of this balance, this very stable climate, our climate by 1.2 degrees of centigrade. So, and let's look at what if often we get the question, okay, but what is it going to be like in a 4-degree warmer world? Well, it's very difficult to say, because let's see when last it was that much warmer. 4 to 5 degrees is something that we could experience it towards the end of the century, so towards the end of your lifetimes. So let's look at when it was that much warmer last. So this is where we are. These are the red ones are the more negative scenarios. The blue ones are the optimistic scenarios. So let's see when it was last 5 degrees warmer. So let's see at the top of the red line that, so we go back, we'll go back and back. There is already no humans on the world. We go back more. There is already no homonoids around, no ice on the northern hemisphere. And only here, so it was basically 20 to 40 million years ago when the Earth was so much warmer than what you may already experience in your lifetimes, latest your children, if we don't do significantly more than what we do today. We have no idea what the world was like that. anyone who says they know what the world will be like is lying. Because simply it was so much different that we just cannot tell. We can tell a few things, but how the economy can survive, how civilization can, how our culture can survive, how our diet can survive, all of this is very, very difficult. For example, of course, this is just this is just the icing of the cake, or the first thing to go is our coffee and our chocolate and our cocoa, but it's not going to be just about our luxury, but really our basic food, or food supplies and food security. Or another figure from our latest synthesis report. This shows that in the purple areas, what we have, this is the number of days that the area is unsuitable for human existence outside, outdoors, without air conditioning. So as you see, even towards 4 to 5 degrees, quite a big part of the world, the vast majority of the year is just not going to be suitable for human existence. And about 3.5 billion people live in the areas which are not going to be suitable for human existence. And whereas I'm sure many of you are thinking, how many have you been to Dubai or to Abu Dhabi or some of these Arab countries? Nobody. Nice. But at least I'm sure you've seen it on the pictures. They exist because they exist in air conditioning. So we could say, okay, no worries, we'll just make sure that they all have air conditioning. Now, the bad news is that even with the most positive economic forecast, the most optimistic economic forecast, the vast majority of these 3.5 billion people will not even have a refrigerator by the end of the century, let alone air conditioning. So basically, 3.5 billion people are either sentenced to death or they will have to go somewhere. Now, guess where? I think we are next to the migration people, so I think it's a good conversation to start having. In any way, this figure shows the same from an earlier paper, not from the IPCC, but this is the area which is basically going to be, whose climate is going to be unsuitable. So, yes, so this was all the bad news. But here's the good news, and that's also what the IPCC says, that yes, on one hand, there is no way we can go back to the nice white part of the climate stripes. We can no longer go back to the climate of our childhood. But the good news is we can still stop many of the changes, or at least slow down, but many of the changes we can stop at certain levels. And perhaps if one message you take home is that every fraction of the degree matters. So every 1.6 is still better than 1.7 degrees warmer. Every fraction of the degree matters. And we can still really make a huge difference. This is the temperature history now zoomed in, so this last figure, but zoomed in on the last 150 years. So we are good. We are around here. Whatever we do, probably we are going to hit 1.5, but we can still stay at 1.5, or if we do nothing seriously different, then we can go all the way to perhaps 4 to 5 degrees hotter by the end of the century. Huge difference, a universal difference. So that's why we should never despair. Yes, it may be already too late for a lot of things. Our told you so is gone. But there is still not late for actually still having a meaningful life. So I think this is another figure from our latest report, and it shows that yes, there are different development pathways and different decision points. Yes, perhaps that road to the really still very livable future is gone, but there are still roads to slightly less livable, but still quite livable future. With every decision, we determine whether we go towards a more livable planet or a less livable planet. And yes, these worst scenarios may lead to potential existential crisis. When I first started to say existential crisis for civilization, not for humanity, although some of my colleagues actually talk about even humanity, then many of my colleagues said, this is really arrogant to say about civilization. But more and more of my colleagues are already joining this choir that really civilization is at risk. But anyway, let's see how we can get to these. Because the good news is, and that's what also our reports are showing, that if we choose the right things and the right pathways to a lower, cooler climate, in fact, our lives will be better. We can be healthier, we can be actually happier, having better work-life balance, we can have cleaner air, we can have more livable cities, we can waste much less time in traffic jams, and there are all a host of other great things, better things to have. So let's just, in my little time I have, I will run over a little bit, but in my little time to have, let's focus on a few good things. And in our panel after my talk, we are going to talk about more good things that offer these opportunities to both handle or address climate change as well as make our lives better. So, first of all, the really great thing and the boring, good old thing is the, tree huggers, right? This is where all the environmental movement started from. But actually, it's still the good old story. Still, trees, large deciduous trees, are, and in general we call them, because in science, of course, we use more fancy words, we call them green infrastructure. Green infrastructure can definitely not only reduce the impact of climate change, but also it's very key for mitigation. Why? Let me show you just one single picture. So what does anybody recognize this? I know you guys recognize this, but others? Which city is this? Do you know which city is this? Oops, I left the Hungarian, sorry. I wanted to replace the text. Anyway, so this is the thermal map of Budapest on a very innocent day. This is really not an extreme day, on an August 31st at noon. What you see here, you probably don't see the scale. The difference between the dark green and the red is actually 30 degrees centigrade, 30 degrees centigrade. What you see is that even in the middle of the city, neighboring areas can have up to 30 degrees centigrade difference in surface temperature. Now, what's going on, right? What's causing this? Well, actually, the explanation is very simple. If you compare this map to the green intensity of Budapest, it's almost identical. It's very clear. Plants act as air conditioners. The only thing that really air conditions our cities are plants, deciduous plants. How do they air condition our cities? What do they do? Exactly, thank you. So through photosynthesis, they actually evaporate water. And through, when you're coming out of a lake in the summer or from the sea and you get cold, right? You get cold because you evaporate, the water evaporates from you, so it takes energy from your body, and that's why you are cold. But once you get dry, you are okay. That's exactly what's happening. The trees take the water, they evaporate, so they cool the air around us, they take the energy from the air. So that way, they really actively air condition. So if we reintroduce more green infrastructure, more green leafy trees into the cities, we could make a huge difference and make much more livable cities. And I love this example. This is actually the school of my children. This was a big plot, but in the middle there were these 3 chestnut trees. Nowadays, all new, at least around my neighborhood, all new plots, what happens when there is construction, they first flat everything, they take the soil away, they put the big house, then they cover the ground. Anyway, this architect did not do that. It was a lot of humility. He simply designed the whole school around these 3 trees instead of cutting them from the middle of the plot. But the result is really cool, because in the summer is literally cool, because these 3 trees not only cool the local climate significantly, but also this just gives a lot of joy to the children because they play around, they play with the chestnuts, and also it's really good for the mental health. We know that actually nature is really important for our mental health and physical health as well. What we show, I will also explain this, but what we also show in our report is that, for example, in a hospital ward, in the same department, same types of patients, 2 rooms next door. One faces a tree, the other faces an infrastructure, a wall or something. The people, the patients from the room which faces a tree go home statistically significantly sooner than, so they heal sooner than the one facing a wall. So we have a lot of scientific evidence that the sight of nature actually improves our physical health, not only our mental health, also our mental health. So yes, nature does a lot of, gives us a lot of services, and nature's crucial services are at risk in a warming world, but also they can help us deal with climate change. I've already mentioned pollination, coastal protection, clearly very significant. We know a lot of you, I'm sure, from here may go to hiking or biking or whatever. Recreation is really important for us. It's an important food source. Health, I just gave a good example how also both our physical and mental health really depends on nature, and our mental health is significantly deteriorating as a result of climate anxiety. Actually, here you get most of the drinking water that you're going to have is due to nature's filtration effect, because we actually drink, in most of Budapest, drink the river Danube's water through nature's filtering ability. Clean air, I've just shown you also how nature regulates climate. So it's all there. We don't need, well, we also need fancy technologies, but a lot of the fancy technologies are right here behind us. We just need to reintroduce them into our urban systems. So, because the problem is that that one of the big risks in Europe, in the Central Europe, is the loss of not only the plastic, but the water. And I think this Indian proverb really shows us that we can adopt to certain degrees, but there are limits to adaptation. Beyond a certain level, there is just, we can just not adapt anymore. And already 50 years ago, or now 51 years ago, the Club of Rome has published the limits to growth, and they already alarmed us that they actually already showed that in the 2020s, we are already going to start going from crisis to crisis. But another piece of good news. So one good news is that, yes, we do have solutions where we eat the cake and have it, and in fact, we get paid for eating the cake and have it. The other good news is that we are hopefully not so dumb as the dinosaurs, and we are not going to just optimize the sense, but actually we are going to hopefully see that we have an existential risk. And it's really good news that actually we have very strong political will, at least stronger than in any other field. And don't look at the text. But does anybody know where this picture was taken? Yes, you were there, I know, but not all of this. This was taken in Paris, where the Paris Agreement was agreed. This is actually 140 heads of state. Never in world history before, not a massacre, not a genocide, not an economic crisis, not a financial crisis, not a world war. Nothing has yet drawn 140 heads of state under one roof. In Paris, we had 140 heads of state under one roof. That showed a tremendous political will that most countries have understood that this is the biggest risk even to our economies. And this is where they agreed that we actually need to protect the climate and try to hold it under, well under 2 degrees. But the trick to this is the only way we can do that, actually, I think, to me, that was one of the kind of not surprising, but I wasn't that aware of this, the important message of the last assessment report. I knew we had to go to net zero, But the point is, even if we let 1.5 degrees go, even if we let 2 degrees go, even if we let 3, 4, 5, any degrees we want to let go, but at any degree we want to stabilize temperature, we still have to go to net zero emissions. So basically, this means that getting out of fossil fuels is non-negotiable. We cannot stabilize the climate with keep using fossil fuels. So even if we want to stabilize at 10 degrees warmer, we still have to do that. Well, if we still have to do that, the important consequence is the sooner we do it, the lower the temperature we stabilize the climate at. So that gives a tremendous urgency and tremendous responsibility for the next few years. Because the sooner we manage to get to this net zero, the sooner we stabilize the climate. And this is the cover page of our previous report on mitigation. And I really like this. It's no longer, big power plant, no longer a big windmill, no longer a big solar farm, but it's just small net zero building, with a couple of photovoltaic panels and just one guy walking around in their little home gardens. I think it really shows that, yes, the solutions can also be at the everybody's individual level. You can actually bring down the solution to the small scale, and small things matter. But yes, there is also a lot of greenwashing that is very hard to go against, because yes, a lot of times they want us to, the companies, this is in Hungarian, but many times the companies would try to feel that actually we have to, individually have to save the climate. So let's see how actually we can, which are another solution where perhaps the companies portray a different solution than what perhaps is the real solution. So mobility is definitely one of the crucial areas, because one of the biggest sources of emissions is actually transport. So sports utility cars are definitely one of the biggest emitters, and there is definitely some status symbol issue around it. And this is not really blaming anybody, but certainly the industry often tries to make us believe that we are more powerful if we have these cars. Well, certainly other parties perceive large cars in a different way. There is also this slight contrast that in a city you may be very, very chic and very, very powerful with a big car, but in fact it's much more practical to have a small cycle. This is a friend of mine in Milano who has this mobile folding bike, and he can get around everywhere where it's really difficult to find a parking spot otherwise. And what we see that, yes, status symbols are changing, and sometimes indeed it's perhaps there is a generational change, although I will be very happy to test this with you and perhaps with the panel, whether this generational change is that we are perhaps changing our value systems, and big cars are no longer such an important for us, but perhaps a really good bicycle is more important. Because it's really important to understand that it's not enough just to change the drivetrain of the big car from one type of engine to the other, because it's still a big car, and it still requires a lot of parking space, a lot of metal to produce it, a lot of other types of emissions, and it is not going to solve our urban problems. Because if we just go for more and more big cars, it can be electric, fully electric, it can be fully automated, it's only going to cause this. Not livable cities. I really like this meme that I'm not sure how true it is, but probably it's very true. The problem is, if we only try to solve the mobility issue by more lanes, by more parking structure, by more, actually we will get here or get here. So yes, if your designer of your home designed your home this way, probably would fire it. But this is how we are designing our cities now. The vast majority of if you look at the actual space in a city, the whole area, the vast majority of this area is actually owned by our metal boxes rather than by us, the people, and serves our metal boxes rather than by us, the people. the alternative is this, and I'm sure many of you are coming from cities that are increasingly going in this direction. Does anyone perhaps happens to recognize which city this could be from? It could be from many European cities, but very good, thank you very much. This is Barcelona. How did you know? Oh, wonderful. Okay, so this is from Barcelona, well, where the mayor did take the courage and closed some of the big roads, gave it back to nature, and what you see is just a much more livable city. There are cafes and shops around, people walking and biking around and getting around. But for those who don't want to walk or cannot take the cycle, there is also public transport. There is a possibility for the disabled. So, but in general, and it's generally just a cooler city because it's otherwise a very hot climate. But with many trees, it has become a much significantly more livable city. And we see that in many countries that bicycle is becoming the more, an important way to get around. So the 15-minute cities, which I understand have become very controversial recently, I don't understand why, but anyway, is definitely, so our new mobility needs are more important to think about than just what engine we have in our cars. But let's go on from mobility to my last topic, which I want to perhaps inspire you or more provoke you for our discussion, and it's just the issue of consumption and growth. Because the problem is, another problem that it's not from the IPCC. This is my concern, that I think in the end many of our environmental problems and even climate change in the end boils down to our addiction to growth. And not only our addiction to growth, because it's not really us, but it's the economic system. Because we always need to grow. Every company always has to demonstrate that it sold more than last year, and it sells more than all the other competitors. But why do we always have to do more? And if they don't sell more, they're in trouble. But in the end, in the last few decades, did this growth, yes, very nice, our economies also have been growing. But did this growth really increase our well-being over the last few years? Let's just look a little bit into what a lot of this growth has really gone into. First of all, do you remember like how often you had to replace, how long your shoes lasted in your childhood and how long your shoes last now? How long, your phone or computer perhaps lasted long time ago, or your washing machine, and how long, well, or let's say in your parents' time, how long now? It's not an accident. This is planned obsolescence. And there is a reason for it. Because companies cannot grow anymore without actually forcing us to keep buying more. Because it was in the United States after the war where everybody had already their 2 cars in the garage, everybody had the washing machine and the refrigerator, and there were the companies, the car companies and other companies. What do we do now? We cannot, this will function for another 50 years. So how do we keep our jobs? How do we keep our economy? How do we keep these companies if nobody is going to buy our cars? So they have to invent something. So they started to invent fashion, they started to invent planned obsolescence, and no ability to repair and things like that. So all of this are actually part of they had to happen as a result of our addiction to growth. Did it make us better off that we now have to buy a new pair of shoes every half a year because not necessarily. And that because we have to replace iPhones so often because it just doesn't work anymore, or my screen, for example, is totally broken and just fixing the screen would cost more than another phone, so I'd rather just work this way, but if you're in a business community, you cannot go with this, so you have to buy another phone and things like that. So anyway, there are all these things that they invented to make us constantly buy more. If none of this works, then even addictions, I don't want to ask because I'm sure you won't admit, but I think many of us are addicted to social media. Many of us are addicted to our phones. Oh, I didn't look anywhere. anyway, not all of us. This is really all of us. And if not this, at least then there is the greenwashing. So we are kind of forced in this rat race that you have to keep growing so that you can buy more, so that you can, so that you work harder to even get more things. So this is very difficult to get out, and certainly consumption is one of the basic drivers of climate change. So then the final question that we all ask, and perhaps we come back to this debate also, everybody asks, okay, so what can I do? We will come back to this a little bit also in the panel, but certainly the important thing is that, yes, we all can do something. Just often we give the excuse that, well, I'm just such a little thing, you know, and there are all these big companies or big this and that. But just imagine if all of us thought that, yes, our action actually makes a difference. So, but what's really important that most of the time, the companies try to make us believe, or maybe innocently, just simply we think by ourselves, but this is really reinforced by the media and a lot of the corporate advertisements, that it's your action that can make a difference. You have to behave well, you have to do recycling, you have to travel less, you have to. And of course, after a while we give up, right? Because we do so much and still nothing is happening. But what we show and what we re-emphasize from a lot of the science, that actually we don't only influence the climate and the environment just by what we choose to buy or how we travel or how we spend our vacations. But in fact, often we are actually influencing the climate much more as professionals. So when we point the finger, oh, it's the companies, it's the government, well, who are the companies? It's us. Many of us, I'm sure, work for companies. Many of our professionals, we are investors. We all have bank accounts. It's our choice which bank we choose as account holder. We are all, well, either we are all parents or we will be parents, but we are all influencers. We all use social media. It's a huge responsibility what you post and what you don't post. Also, we are citizens in a democracy, and there are many other ways. So many different ways to influence this whole thing. And usually, it's the least thing what we actually buy or what we actually do or how we sacrifice ourselves. So the most important point is to understand that you cannot win a battle at all fronts. It's best if you yourself understand where is your biggest contribution, where you can fight a battle. If you don't have that kind of soldier, or if you don't have that kind of ammunition, it's not worth trying to feel bad that that's not a fight you can win. But it's really good idea to understand where you can make yourself a bigger difference as an influencer, as a professional, as a parent, and or as an investor. So the point is, we all know we need change, but it is difficult to change. And I'm not trying to say that all of you need to change everything, but the world needs to change, and we all are responsible for changing the world. So what I've shown is that, yes, we can fight climate change. We can still stabilize the climate at livable ways, and at livable levels. And what I showed, we can also do it in ways when we will be healthier, we'll be happier, we will have more time, we will less addicted to many things, we will live in cleaner cities, more livable cities, waste less time in congestion. So yes, we can do it. Let's not leave the world this way to our children. It's mostly for me, not for you, it's for my generation. And we will have now a fantastic panel, but I do want to show you that if you want to follow me on social media, I often post different ideas how to make the world better. Thank you very much for your attention.